3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Welcome to the System and Soul Podcast, a place for founders and entrepreneurs to discover breakthrough in their business. I'm Benj Miller, fellow founder, business coach, and your host. This is your place to gain clarity and control as you lead through the challenges you face every day in your business. Running a business is just hard, so we're bringing you the conversations with people who are figuring it out, have figured it out, to help you find breakthrough. Welcome to the System and Soul Podcast. Welcome back to System and Soul. This is your host, Benj Miller, and I am continuing a conversation with Robby Angle and Mark Butler on intentionality. So if you haven't heard part one of that, go listen to that first. I'll give you a little more context for where we're at in the conversation. But the reason that we're digging into this idea of intentionality is because I have seen it show up in the fruit of these two gentlemen's lives and what they're able to do because they're intentional. And intentionality can cause pain and friction and things we don't want to think about, but the results from it are huge. So that's why we're leaning in, and it's a new year, so it's a great time to do that. Mark and Robby, welcome back. We're going to pick up right kind of where we were. We're talking about parenting, but like you said, Robby, if 80% of parenting is modeling a decent human being and a decent marriage, how are you guys being intentional with your marriage right now?
Hey, can I ask a different question, start somewhere different, and then go to marriage? Is that allowed on this podcast?
It sounds like you already did.
All right, here's the situation. We're talking about like things we can do that are intentional, like practices, that kind of thing, which misses that's like 20%. The 80% is like, what is the macro perspective that we avoid in our lives about intentionality that then leads to the plans, the systems, the things that we're doing? Like in the last episode, we talked about the things we're doing at work and with our kids, but really that's the byproduct. That's the symptom, not the source. So what's the source, the 80%? I really think like the men that I've learned from and what wisdom looks like in this area of intentionality is just a really intentional focus on the destination or the goal. Like which we can't see clearly because it's the future and the destination. And so there's a holistic macro approach to intentionality that is underpinned with seeking wisdom for a preferred future, having clarity of the preferred future, and then reverse engineering into what actionables I can do today. But if we have that wrong destination preferred future, then we're spending our lives building an intentional ladder that gets us on the wrong building, whatever that metaphor is. And we get to the top and we're like, oh, we missed it. So I think all this is like silly. I mean, we can be the most intentional maximizers in the world, and if it's the wrong area, then we missed it entirely. And so those questions of like, there's macro questions that wisdom asks and wise men and women ask of us. It's like, what am I missing, or what matters, or why am I made? Like, why am I here? And you can't, and there's an order to those. Like, you can't identify what am I missing until you know what matters, until that you go, well, what's the point of life? Why am I made? Why am I here? And so that order of like really seeking wisdom and processing why I'm made, why I'm here, what's the point of my life, then leads us to the secondary step of, okay, then what matters? If I have an idea of what the point of life is, why I'm here, then I can say, well, what matters? What's most important? And then if I can clarify what's most important, then I can answer the question of what's missing in my life. So there's a order of thinking that we can't do ourselves because we're limited in our wisdom and perspectives. So having the time, the courage, and the prioritization to ask those questions with those ahead of us that we trust is like, if there's one macro thing that I think all of us could move towards intentionality, is do we have counsel from those ahead of us to ask these intentional questions of what's the point, why am I here, why am I made, in order to say what matters, in order to then determine what's missing. Like, I'm not taking my wife on a date, or I'm not spending quality time, I'm not aware of her love languages and therefore being intentional about that. So I hate to go practical.
Well, but that's a good reframe, like, because I'm sure that I skipped that because I think you two do that so well. So that was my frame of reference, but yes, that could easily go unsaid and unacknowledged, that we're not just being intentional to be like better humans or more productive, more efficient. There's a bigger goal and mission. And I think you guys have wrestled with those hard questions. So I'm trying to steal your life hacks to help other people.
See, and that's the miss. Yeah, I can't steal all of Mark's life hacks.
No, that's right.
And if I don't understand the principal questions, it's like Tom Brady has life hacked life. He's like the GOAT. He's married to a supermodel and he's like internationally famous. And look at his face. He's like depressed and sad and he's going through divorce and like the macros. Sorry, Tom. I don't mean that. That was a bad example. But
listening.
Like we need, the rate of divorce is highest among wealthy, older people because they climbed the wrong ladder. And so what matters most in reverse engineering, which we can't do on our own. So if there's one greatest cheat code, don't parrot or take a good idea and apply it. Like find someone ahead of you that looks like your hopes and the longings of your heart to be like, to get to. Find somebody ahead and say, guide me and coach me on.
But I think you are that. You are now. You have that, but you are now that. And so that is this conversation, because I think there's going to be people that are going to be inspired, encouraged, have new ideas, have new thoughts. I had never thought about that. I didn't know that I could be that intentional in that area of my life. And so just by us having this conversation in a public forum, I think you're getting to be that sage that you sought out before in your life.
Of which I'd say thank you to you. And second, for the people listening, I mean, the number one thing would be, are you intentional in consistently pursuing wisdom from somebody ahead of you and what matters?
Yeah.
Because if that's not the case, that's like the greatest cheat code hack to life. And so if we're going to be intentional about living lives of purpose and well-lived in our marriage and family and all, and businesses and leadership and all that stuff, if we're not intentional and consistently seeking and trusting the wisdom of those in our lives, we're missing out. And so the fact that you're listening to this podcast in episode 2 of Intentionality means you have a posture and a wisdom and to seek out and continue to pursue wisdom.
Yeah.
But learning wisdom is one thing. Trusting wisdom is a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't agree, I don't see it, but I'm going to trust that, which you can't do without relationship, because you don't trust me. Whoever's listening to this, they don't, or they probably trust you. They've listened to you enough, but
who knows?
Yeah.
But this whole conversation is a cool product of a group of guys who sought not only sages ahead of them, but a band of brothers. That's how we all know each other, is through a group that are now sages. They are in their 60s. So Rusty Gordon, 70s. John Ritchie, who you've heard his name a million times on this podcast. Reggie Campbell, who's now passed, but is probably the number one common denominator between us. They, with a group of probably 2 or 3 more guys, Charlie Paparelli, is Pete in that group?
Yeah.
Pete and Brandon.
Carl Woodruff.
Those guys have journeyed life together with consistency. I think they have a monthly dinner, and they get real, and they've gotten real for a long time. And the ripples of their impact from that group of guys that they do it together and then they go do their own things. But the ripple of their things, we're in Atlanta, and it's very visible in this city. And I think that, they're aging out. Reggie passed last year. Rusty moved to a farm. John's still in the game. Charlie's backing out. He wants to focus on his grandkids, and there's a void coming where there is a next season of leadership that needs to be tangible. It needs a voice. It needs hands and feet. And you guys are leading the way. Especially with what you do, Mark. So diligent about the 6 or 8 guys that you take through your program every year. Anyway, back to marriage.
But that's the point, though. I mean, that's the cheat. Like, if there's one determinant of whether a man or woman stays the course and finishes well, which, let's be real, it's a narrow road. All of us listening, like if you look at 100 men and women in their 70s, how many lived a life of intentionality and purpose and like stayed the course? Is very few, because it's hard and it's a narrow road and there's things that take us out and we get derailed or whatever. And so if there's like, again, my issues of fears of not being on that narrow road, reverse engineering and studying that for the past 30 years, I think the single greatest determinant and variable of whether somebody maintains the course and finishes well is if they're intentional and consistent with others in their life they're fully known by. Like, that's it. Like, that's the life hack of intentionality, because I'm pointing to y'all in this room, tell me when my fly is down, ask me the hard questions, because we've had the reps to trust each other and we're intentional and consistent enough to help me from being me. You're protecting me from my weaknesses and you're supporting me in my strengths and pushing me to my potential, which I can't do because I'm subjective and you're objective, and those guys ahead of us. And that's the essence of what they did. They understood the value of that. They prioritized that relationship, which is super hard in our 30s, 40s, and 50s to prioritize relationships, because it's, for all the reasons, they prioritized it. That was the hack, that why those men are they're abnormally successfully living lives of intentionality and purpose and on the narrow path. And that's the secret sauce, is that intentionality relationally. So again, I just, like, if there's one thing, that's it. Now, best practices, go read a book on marriage stuff. I mean, we'll talk about it, Benj, to honor you, since you asked the question. It's your podcast. But that's the thing you can't cheat and bypass, which is hard.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get a little fired up about that.
Well, that is your soapbox that you're on for a good reason. Like, that's your world. So,
yeah.
So guys, we talked last episode about the quote that had really been burning a hole in me for the last year or so. And the quote is, to feel the pleasure of God, find your gift and serve his people. And we talked about, I mentioned that I feel like I have the spiritual gift of encouragement. If I do have one other gift, I think it's really, second half of my life, I've been able to latch on to really good advice and learn from other people's mistakes. And so, to piggyback on what you're talking with these legends and sages with Rusty Gordon and Reggie Campbell, and across the board podcasts that I listen to. So from an advice perspective, my wife Sarah and I, one of the things that we've been focusing on from a parenting perspective came from a podcast and a book from Andy and Sandra Stanley. And they talk about their North Star of parenting is they want kids who enjoy being with us and with each other when they no longer have to be.
I love that.
And so the North Star of parenting from that is 100% relationship based.
Yeah.
And so every aspect from a parenting and family perspective is going to be focused on the relationship, building, rebuilding, maintaining a relationship with the children and with the spouse. And so he set very few rules in his household. I think first and foremost is honor your mother. And the second rule is never tell a lie. And so the cool thing is I'm in a very discipline focused season with three, super active boys and a teenager baby girl who, basically gets anything and everything she wants. And so from a kind of a mantra perspective, the kind of the key golden rules from that perspective is no dishonesty, no disrespect, no disobedience. But the focus is going to be, any and all discipline is going to be focused on restoring that relationship. And so, kind of a neat example. Last night, we had a baseball lesson and then made the mistake of trying to take the family out to dinner. And it was, Robby, God bless you with 8 children. It was a complete train wreck.
We don't go out to dinner.
Yeah. Finally came to the pinnacle of, crayons were being cut up with knives.
Oh, yeah.
And then the pinnacle was my 9-year-old was doing the breaststroke on a table, and kind of look over. My wife did an amazing job. She walked over with him and kind of grabbed him and took him to the car. Dinner's over. No dessert, no ice cream. Had a long conversation in the car. I took the rest of the family and we picked up Brewster's ice cream. But it's like if you have that kind of North Star in parenting specifically focused on, you want to build into these kids that they want to hang on, they want to spend time with us and with each other when they no longer have to. I mean,
Was his form so bad that you couldn't give him ice cream? Just the form was awful? What was the problem?
Was it a train wreck? Absolute.
So what's y'all?
From a dinner perspective, I mean, if we go out and eat, we try to eat as fast as we can and tip really well. That's the plan.
Yeah.
What's your North Star for marriage, to honor Benj's question?
So hold on. It's you reminded me of something huge on parenting, and then I would love to talk about marriage. But our guiding principles of parenting, very much in line with what you said. Parent their heart, but raise adults. So that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to raise kids. We're trying to raise adults. So our 6-year-old packs his lunch for school because we don't need to do that. He needs to do that. He needs to learn how to do it, because whether you're 6 or 26, mom and dad aren't going to be there to do it for you. So they're not neglected or abandoned, but they are pretty self-sufficient.
Ben Sass wrote a great book, The Vanishing American Adult, which is it's a great parenting book from a senator. Anyways, just as a freebie if anybody's in that season.
Good plug. Marriage.
What's your North Star? I want to hear y'all's North Star. Like, what's the destination, the goal that you hope for in your marriage?
My hope would be that we are in love with each other 60 years into marriage. I just made that up, but I think that's it.
What about you, Mark?
So my North Star is, to be happy at home is the ultimate result of all ambition. So anything and everything that I do on a day-to-day basis is, you see all these guys, and especially with these young, high potential leaders I work with. They make the mistake that they think their family serves their job, and when actually it should be their job is serving their family. And so being happy at home from a marriage perspective, I think this is a John Ritchie quote. If your marriage is your base camp, and so if you're not happy at home, you are vulnerable in every other area of your life. And so I probably my wife Sarah's really, really good at it, planning dates and vacation and family outings, and a lot of that she's so good at it, so I take a back seat. But certainly an area that a couple of things that I work with these young guys on are, never setting an expectation at work that's going to be in variance of your responsibilities at home. So I see a lot of, you see these young potential guys that are the missiles, that are 80-hour-a-week type guys that are trying to make partner. And if your wife understands if the ox is in the ditch one time and you might need to work late and get something done, but the problem is when the ox is in the ditch every night.
Yeah.
And get the kids to bed and pop open the laptop and spend 2 hours focused on a project or a writing assignment or what have you, and different sleeping arrangements and going to bed at different times. So just from a North Star perspective is, marriage is the base camp.
Yeah.
My goal is just to have more sex. Is that, intentionality. What leads to that? Is that allowed? You can edit that out, Benj.
I'm not the editor. Everything's good with me.
It in my ring it says cherish and serve. Like, I want her to feel cherished and served. Like, that's it. And if that's a North Star, then we'll be together 60 years and look back more in love than we are now.
Hey, listener, I wanted to take a second in the middle of this episode to take a time out and tell you about one of our partners. The key to running a successful organization is having a bench of leaders you can rely on. But building leaders can be daunting and costly. There's not enough time in the day for you to mentor every person on your team, and it takes a lot of effort to gather resources and measure leadership growth in your people. That's why WildSpark created a scalable leadership development system to grow your people in a consistent way. Each month, your people will hop online, learn essential leadership skills tailored to your organization's goals. Then your team will meet together and discuss practical application. It's a turnkey leadership development system that's scalable, sustainable, and strategic. Your people are the key to your success. Invest in their growth with WildSpark. Learn more at wildspark.com. That's WILDSPARQ.com. That's WildSpark with a Q.com. With 8 kids, how do you have a marriage and not just a house of co-parenting?
I thought you were going to ask, with 8 kids, how do you have a shot at your goal of having sex? It's very difficult. That's for another podcast. Yeah, I think just Emily is better at this because I'm like, how do you get any alone time? And she's found little ways to get micro doses of what she needs. Like, she'll listen to a certain type of music in the morning while she's getting ready. That helps her, like, get those spaces together. And so we're trying to find little pockets. Like, after dinner, we try to sit together for 15 minutes because that's about all you can get.
Yeah.
And, we should get away for a night every quarter and, go to a hotel, get away. We just can't do that because we can't take advantage of my mother-in-law that much. So we try to get the little moments of intentionality, and like spending an hour on a Sunday afternoon during nap time where we talk about the week. It does wonders for us being on the same page and connecting, and so little things like that.
Yeah.
We're not great at it though. It's hard.
My frame for this year for marriage is just healthy people make healthy marriages. So how can I support her her separate of me, just, being the healthiest version of herself, and then me take care of me and see what happens in terms of like, what if I'm not as intentional with my marriage, but I'm just intentional with making sure she has the space and resources and whatever to be the healthiest version of her.
Peter Burke is smiling right now. Peter's one of these sages who we're learning from, and he focuses on marriage. And the greatest counsel of wisdom that I've trusted in regards to steering how I engage with Emily came from him. He said, find that thing that ignites her heart, which is what you just said, like the best version of herself. If it's gardening, and she's a terrible gardener, it doesn't matter. Buy her all the gardening stuff, encourage it, celebrate it to ignite her passions and her heart, which goes back to what Mark was talking about of like, find our design, what brings us alive. And if we can celebrate and protect and bless that in our spouses, which means we have to be attentive to what makes Eric alive, or Sarah or Emily, find what that thing that they love, that lights up, and then just support it, encourage it, fund it, whatever that is. And if we did that for each other, Emily does that for me better than I do it for her, but that's how we serve each other. We honor each other and we serve each other by affirming and encouraging.
Do better, Robby.
Do better. Intentionality.
So if 80% of all of this is how we lead ourselves well so that we can have a great marriage, great relationships, great business, all the intentionality, what are you guys doing for yourself this year? What boundaries, what goals, what practices, anything different?
With me, Benj, I'm trying to focus on that perfect day and cadence design. So giving me ample opportunities to excel in specific areas, whether it's business or health or family, understanding the daily cadence, the weekly cadence, the monthly, the yearly cadence, and how my business cycle, coaching cycle, mentoring cycle fits within that cadence. And so specifically, I've found that if I'm not spending that hour of time in my Bible on a daily basis, or journaling or writing or reading something from either a faith-based or personal development perspective, then I'm off the whole next day. So, I specifically find that if I'm not caring for myself from a personal development, spiritual development perspective, that it affects every single thing that I do. So from a marriage perspective, from a parenting perspective, from a coaching perspective, from a leadership development perspective. So if I'm not in the Word or in some type of spiritual development focus on a daily basis in the morning, then typically the whole day's shot. And then the same way from an athletic perspective, like if I set a goal to be in the gym at least 4 days per week. And so whether that's in the pool or lifting weights or on the treadmill, if I'm not feet on the pavement, getting out some of that stress or try to kind of think through problems or issues. So I absolutely spend that time in the gym on a weekly basis. And then
we can tell, Mark, but keep going.
And then finally, from you guys know I love to fish, and so I plan typically a 4 to 5 hour fishing trip on a weekly basis. That's typically planned out a couple of weeks to a month in advance, and that's really time that I get to. I want to spend time with people where we can have deep, intimate conversations about things that matter. And I get a lot of my personal development, I think, from taking a guy like you, Benj, or you, Robby, out on the boat and really some side-by-side time. It's not that face-to-face time where you're staring over a coffee, looking into someone's eyes. It's more that time where I think men bond and doing active type stuff. And so, having a line in the water and being able to talk through things that matter with people that I love and respect, that is so, so life-giving to me on a weekly basis.
And the people that you invite.
That's what's up. Like when I think of like atomic habits, the things that help me stay healthy and balanced, I think that there's one main one that I've settled into about 6 months ago of like, I cannot look at a screen until like 9 o'clock. So I get to the office at 7 and I can't even look at it before I get to the office. I don't listen to the radio. I like zero inputs into my head. But time between 6 when I wake up and 9, and that has provided the space to focus on what matters, to process and contemplate, to read, to do the things that help me stay balanced. Because once an input hits via a text message, an email, the machine of my brain can't slow down, and therefore I've functioned days on end without being present, engaged, or in the space of asking the bigger questions like why am I made, what matters, and what's missing in my life, that I have to slow it down. And so that hack, that atomic habit, whatever, which is cutting that, has been the biggest differentiator for me.
Yeah, I might need to pick that up. I'm really, my goal for the year is sobriety. And I don't necessarily struggle with alcohol or drugs, but screens and distractions, things that take me away from the present. And so to be totally sober in the moment, being able to handle whatever emotions, problems, etc. come my way, I think that's the biggest area for growth for me. Last year was physical. I accomplished some big physical things that I wanted to do.
Again, we can tell, but keep going.
Yeah, got in the best shape of my life. Not so much anymore, sliding into the new year. But I think this year's going to have a different focus. I'm struggling less to find the motivation to go all in on the physicality part of it. But there's something to the sobriety and presence and slowness that I think I'm being invited into. So you guys are both obviously very intentional people. You're also intentional with relationships that we've touched on a bunch of times, but when that shows up in our leadership or how we think about leadership, we talk about at System and Soul that 80% of leadership is leading yourself well. And if we can do that well, then we can help other people lead themselves well. So less about leading other people and more about enabling other people to lead themselves well. I know you maybe wouldn't use those words, Mark, but that's what you do with your leadership development. And then, Robby, you've got your own kind of frame on leadership. So I'd love to spend our last minutes together kind of talking through this idea of leadership in a way that maybe is less accidental and more intentional. There's I'm going to mess up this stat slightly, but it's something close to, I just heard this, or maybe it was on our podcast. You can go fact check it. The first time that most people get management training, this isn't even leadership's another thing, but let's start with management, is like 46 years old. But the first time that they average age somebody starts to manage other people is like 28, which means that the majority of our workforce is managing people and untrained to do so. And that just lacks such intentionality that we're not replicating leaders, growing people. So how are you guys thinking about that? What are you doing?
I mean, I spend a lot of time working with teams. If we help mature into our potential with intentionality, we have people that we're intentional and consistent with, which means, what is the pattern for that? Intentional and consistent means we're consistent. There's a routine, so we get the reps, and intentional means we maximize that time. So those are small enough pockets where we can be more known in order for our strengths to be encouraged and our weaknesses to be protected. Therefore, we can maximize the power of relationships in order to continue and grow. And so you think about that in your life. That's like your family system. That's your leadership team or your team at work. That's a small group. That's a peer group. That's your fantasy football group. We gather in smaller pockets because we long for longing and belonging. And so what are those environments that you can find that? And so small groups, I was doing that for a while. And so some small groups that get together, 6 to 12 people with intentionality and consistency for a purpose, most of those are lame. And so what differentiates those? Same with leadership teams. Leadership teams are 5 to 7 people that get together to accomplish a purpose. And those meetings, those gatherings are consistent, but typically not as intentional. And they're, whether they're effective or not, what are the differentiators between a transformational group and a non-transformational group? And I think there's 5. It's a sailing metaphor. We wrote a book called The Cure for Groups, for small groups to not be lame. And the first component is determine your destination. It's a sailing metaphor. So do you know where you're going, which we've talked a lot about on this podcast?
Common purpose.
Yes, common purpose. Determine the goals for your group. This is what y'all do in System and Soul. The second part is the captain. Whoever's responsible, are you leading with intentionality and vulnerability? And that's not just the leader. That's each of us in the group. We have effect. We lead everybody else in the group. And so are we leading with intentionality and, in particular, vulnerability to set a precedent of an environment that is high trust? The third part's the crew. You're going to have a culture of your crew on the boat on a journey. And so have you clarified your group culture, which System and Soul does really well as a system to help you clarify what is your culture, what are your values, what are the spoken and the unspoken rules of how you're going to operate. You either can speak that and shape it, or you can let it figure itself out. The fourth is the ship. Like, you have a vessel to get you to where you're going. Is it the right structure? And that's System and Soul, like that 90-minute weekly meeting. That's the ship. That's designing your time for transformation to get you where you want to go. And the fifth is what a lot of teams don't do well. A lot of teams you're on, your family even, which is the route. You plan ahead to get to where you want to go, which is planning ahead and also evaluating, were we on the right course and what got in the way? So that every 6 months, is it on the calendar to plan the next 6 months to go back? Again, System and Soul, this is like, y'all do all this, but this is different language for a holistic way that groups and leadership teams can be more intentional. You're usually missing one of those 5, and you can identify and do better on.
That's really good. And I appreciate the System and Soul plug. Mark, talk us through how you do this. Like, what is the intentionality in the recruiting? What does that look like? Like, how do you know? And then what is it that what's that look like as you guide them through that?
Sure. So on my end, I mean, outside of my family, leading young men in a group setting has given me the absolute most joy in my life. Robby, you mentioned earlier the fact that, the high percentage of guys that retire to the golf course and don't finish well, as I think Rusty Gordon would put it. Those are the guys that never tasted the joy and the just absolute excitement of leading young men. And so from a recruiting perspective, my goal is another, I think, Reggie quote, more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. And so my co-mentor, Marcus, and I, we take on 6 high potential guys on a yearly basis, and we do a very intensive 10-month leadership development process. The first step of that is the recruiting process. So as a recruiter by trade, that's an area where I bring a lot of value. And my goal in the recruiting process is I'm going to cast a very wide net. I'm going to talk to a lot of people. I'm going to have a very, very specific niche profile that I'm looking for. So with my guys specifically, I'm looking for 30 to 40-year-old young men. All of these guys have to be married. Most all are going to have a young family. And then most all are going to be business guys, because that's where I feel like I can provide a lot of value from a business perspective. And the key aspect of that profile is I want the absolute highest potential leader that I can find. And so I think I mentioned it earlier, I'm looking for missiles, even though they might not be guided missiles. And in the recruiting process, I talk to each one of these guys, and my focus is really to kind of talk them out of joining the group and just set a super high expectation. And I mean, you tell a 35-year-old, VP of sales that he can't cut it in your group. I mean, you ought to see how much they're going to rise to the occasion. And so talking them out of it, absolute cream of the crop with those 6 guys. And then from day one, just setting extremely high expectations. And so I want to let them know that, their time is valuable. Their family's time is valuable. The other guys in the group, their time is valuable. My time is valuable. I'm not trying to waste it. And kind of a cool stat. So I've had 5 groups to this point. That's 30 guys that have been in the group. That's 45 meetings total, including 8 overnight retreats. That equals, I think, 270 swings. And at that point, I've had 4 people that have been tardy for a meeting, and then 0 that have missed a meeting, which is pretty impressive. And I think a lot of that is, God's blessing in helping select those men and setting really, really high expectations. But then it's also a bit of peer pressure. You got these guys that are all, they come into that first meeting and they're kind of seeing what their competition is and edging it out. And they come to the next meeting and they fumble on their scripture memory or haven't read the book. It's a little bit embarrassing, to be honest. And so I try to use my this process and my leadership skills that I've developed over the last however many years with a bit of peer pressure to have maximum impact on these guys and these leaders. Like I feel my best investment is going to be from leading leaders versus leading followers. So that's really the North Star. And then from an actual leadership perspective, another quote is, deep work over time in community. And so deep work over time in community, deep work, we're talking about big boy stuff. Like my partner in this, Marcus, is an FBI agent, and he's really the hammer in our group, where I'm more of maybe the velvet hammer, a little softer relationship focused perspective. But he says all the time, like, we're doing big boy stuff. This is not little boy stuff. And then over time, and this is a process, so it's kind of a Peter versus Paul perspective. So you got Paul who, scales on his eyes, and the next day he's, out preaching in the temple. And then you got Paul who spent, 3 years with Jesus and still denied him on his last days, but then ultimately came around and, built the church. One of the, whatever your faith is, it's one of the greatest movements the world has ever seen on the back of a group of guys, and Peter kind of being that rock in the list. And then finally, in community. So, there really, if you look at the New Testament, there's no lone rangers in the New Testament. I think another John Ritchie quote. So we're in this, for this 10-month period, and then we're, in it forever. So in my leadership with these guys, one of the most amazing things from my perspective is these guys have all turned into my best friends. So, you take a 35-year-old guy or even a 45-year-old guy like us, you sit down and make a list of guys who actually love you, and I would think that that's going to be very small, where, mean, these 30 guys, I mean, I tell them I love them. They tell me that they love me and love me back, and I can feel it. And so I think that's one of the, I mean, keynotes of this group is, I mean, you got to love these guys. So you come in, some are hard to love. And I mean, even if it goes down, I mean, talking about from a coaching perspective with young athletes, I mean, there's some of these guys that are, I mean, hard to love, but you got to, I mean, make yourself love these guys. It's I think agape love versus the eros love, what have you. I mean, an act of the will to love these guys. And I think that makes all the difference in the group that you're leading. And then, I mean, second is from a preparation perspective. And so, I mean, I am extremely intentional about the process and maximizing and how well that I prepare. And so, I mean, sometimes I'll be leading a group meeting, and I mean, these guys will think I'm a sage or an apostle. Like, I memorize the scripture and I know this. And when actually I just spent a couple hours beforehand, and I mean, having the show notes and being able to drive it and lead it. And it's just like, I mean, coaching 7-year-old football. You have I've had assistant coaches that are so, I mean, overwhelmed and freaked out. And I'm like, you can't stay a step ahead of a 7-year-old and coaching football. I mean, we're not running a spread offense. Like, go in and prepare a little bit. So I over prepare. I'm available to these guys. And so, I mean, most all these guys are spending, I mean, multiple trips out on the boat, and I mean, doing this one-on-one time, and I'm leading with vulnerability. So from day one in our first meeting, really, where I tell my story, these guys look at me and they're like, man, this guy's all buttoned up, and look at his LinkedIn profile and picture. And then I come out and tell the non-Sunday school version of my story, and they're like, whoa, man, what am I getting into? So vulnerability, service, and sacrifice, and then, I mean, finally, just extreme follow-up with these guys. I mean, you got a guy in this season of life. I mean, how many people actually follow up and care about them and spend that time to say, I mean, hey, how's it going? I think you should look at this. Here's a book you should read. Like, going above and beyond with kind of a cadence and follow up and making sure they're on the right track. So it's absolutely one of the most joyful areas in my life is working with these young men. And kind of it's hard to track stats in there, but of those 30 guys, I've got 8 now that are leading their own groups.
Oh, so, amazing.
Yeah, Reg used to say you're never a disciple until you make a disciple that's out making other disciples. So it's also joyful to get to see some of these guys get out and start their own group. And on a side note, I've had 6 guys that have stepped out and started their own business. So I'm always encouraging these guys to maximize their life and live life to the full. So it's been neat to go side by side and see some of these guys step out from an entrepreneurial perspective, which has been amazing.
You guys both inspire me. I'm fired up just listening to the two of you.
Hey, before that, I just, as we talk about intentionality of relationships and wisdoms and finding mentors and stuff, there is one principle, because a lot of us listening going, I don't have somebody ahead of me investing in me. Where are they? And so many men and women go, I hear them saying, I don't have somebody that's caring about me, pouring into me the way Mark's describing. And where are they? There's a principle that changes in mentorship that I just want to throw out there. We get trained in our teenage years and college years that older, wiser people pursue us and invest in us. And then we get out of college and we spend our 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s going, where are the mentors? Where are the people ahead of me to invest in me and care for me? And they're the men and women who are ahead of us in their 50s, 60s, 70s are going, where's the younger leaders who are hungry and curious and humble enough to seek wisdom? It changes. The rule is, after college, that I observe is that it's now our responsibility to pursue and ask those ahead of us, can we learn from you?
I agree.
And so it's just a change in our mind of if this is the cheat to intentionality and staying the course, all of us listening going, who is somebody we know, or where can we go find somebody we know? And it's our responsibility to pursue them. And all that looks like is asking them questions and then trusting their wisdom by applying what they say. That's it. That's the cheat code of where are the marks out there.
100%. And I'll throw in this tidbit. Don't be afraid to pay for it either.
Yes. Yes, I'm paying for it right now.
I've paid coaches. I've consistently paid a coach for 15 years.
Yep.
At least one consistently through that time. At times, I had 3, which was probably too many and a mistake. But
yeah, fools do not go to counseling. I'll leave that with that.
And on that note, hey, everybody, thanks for joining. I hope you're as fired up and inspired for this new year as I am, sitting with these 2 guys and the lives that they lead and the impact that they are able to make. I'll leave in the show notes a way to get a hold of both of them, find them both, so that Mark can say no to you when you reach out. And
I'll be like, what's up? Let's talk.
Hey, selective neglect is the term I'm taking from this podcast. So thanks for hanging out with us. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm curious. I know these guys really well, and so I'm curious your takeaways from this conversation. So if something hits you, let us know what it was. Shoot us a line. We'd appreciate it. Until next time, go get breakthrough.